All right. Good evening, Constant Elevation audience, all of us around the world. Welcome to another episode of Asian American Pacific Islander Leaders Unmuted. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Gabe Rockavilla. Want to first say shout out to everybody who tuned in last week. I think it was awesome to see. Again, this is like all this YouTube live stuff is significantly new to me. I'm old, so I just don't do these kind of things. I'm much more comfortable in the podcast kind of scene, but I'm embracing this, right? And this is going to be a platform to talk about stuff that you probably wouldn't hear otherwise. In our community of AAPIs, we probably talk about this on the down low, but I think it's important for us to, leading into May, as you know, as AAPI Heritage Month, starting off on Saturday. That is correct. I know the calendar, and where we're going to go forward. But there's just a lot of topics, and this is going to be another topic. If you didn't already see, it's going to be, as soon as you see the title, I think this actually became one of my not my most favorite topics, but definitely the one that garners probably facilitates the most emotional response, right? And so I didn't want to have this as a solo show. I wanted to make sure that I get a balanced kind of approach and just allowing this platform for people to share their stories. And we're definitely going to have some stories with us tonight. So tonight, what we have two guests. I'm going to do some magic on my side. Watch this. I can do this and go remove this and then go boom, boom, and then much better. So tonight I have two guests with me, and I'll introduce them one at a time. And so the first one is going to be, I wanted to make sure I get a balanced experience as far as making sure a female voice is going to be shared tonight as well. So I have Captain Faliesha Yaeger joining us tonight. Faliesha, welcome to the show. Oh, sorry, I had to unmute you. My bad. Go ahead.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And then I also have the homie from Alaska. We were teammates together in the mighty 673rd Comm Squadron, the great and powerful Master Sergeant Ron Esposo. Ron, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, sir.
Yeah. So, Faliesha, why don't you give the audience some of your background?
So, Faliesha Yaeger, I am originally from Sumter, South Carolina. So I spent most of my time growing up in South Carolina, actually. But I was originally born in Alaska.
Oh, shout out. Okay.
Yeah. Fairbanks, though, but, it's Alaska, I guess. So I am half Korean and half white.
Okay, cool. And Ron, how about your background?
So I'm Master Sergeant Ron Esposo. I grew up in the Philippines, Zambales, Philippines, and I migrated to the U.S. around when I was 16 years old. And after that, went to college. Tried that, didn't work. So I tried joining the Air Force. I thought I was going to get away from school, but, Air Force, the whole airman concept, I still have to go to school, which I finished my bachelor's. That's a good one. And then I'm in Alaska, serving as a section chief for cyber services. Sorry. And then I just recently got an assignment to Vandenberg, California. So I'll be heading there in September.
Yeah. So because you were a former airman, you are now a guardian.
Sir, yes, sir.
Hey, awesome, dude. That's cool. Like, this is the first time I had a guardian on my shows. I want to say that, like, I've had some Army guys, and I'm gonna have a Navy guy into one of my shows at some point in time. But the idea of like, no, we got to make sure we're all represented here. So very proud that you made the cut, and you're gonna be. So one of our slogan in 673rd is "Wired Up, Fired Up," and so Ron is wired up, fired way up, like all the way up. That's where he's at. So it's awesome stuff. All right. So, and then for everybody who didn't pay attention or didn't tune into last week. So my background is I'm also Filipino, and I grew up in Hawaii. I was very, very fortunate to kind of grow up. My dad was in the Air Force. He was a maintenance chief. And so my background, though, is I had the fortunate opportunity to grow up in Hawaii, and all of these different things you hear, like growing up in South Carolina, growing up in the Philippines, growing up in Hawaii. Asians, spoiler for everybody who may not be Asian, we all don't grow up in the same like Asia. We all come from different backgrounds, and all of those experiences actually inform like how we are as a person, how we become a leader in the Air Force, and just how we conduct ourselves. And what'll happen is that's where like the title of this week's episode is Not Being Asian Enough. This is one of those kind of things of where amongst ourselves, we were talking a little bit before we started the show. One of the things that I noticed is that amongst ourselves, and this is kind of a hard thing to say, we sometimes are the biggest obstacle. We're the ones that are self-creating these weird barriers amongst ourselves because we see each other not being Asian enough. There happens to be a Asian American Pacific Islander officer for Air Force and space officers, and so I posted a thing there, and I started saying like, hey, so are there any people who asked, actually was for a female voice because I already knew Ron was going to be part of this episode, so I asked for a female voice of has anybody felt not Asian enough, and then like so many responses, and it was even from males as well, but I was specifically looking for a female voice, and so Faliesha, I'll pass it over to you. What exactly, when you saw that comment, what was your first reaction and some of the things going through your head?
So immediately I was like, I need to message him because I know that at least talking to some of my mixed friends, a lot of people have felt that even from the Asian community that because you're half, you're like less than or just like not good enough in general. So something that made me think like I really need to message you was because I actually caught myself a couple years ago whenever, just in casual conversations with people, just saying like, oh yeah, I'm only half Korean. And it's like, well, only like I'm 50% Korean, like literally.
That's weird. Yeah. That's weird that you caveated
they're like, oh yeah,
only.
I'm only. It's like, well, where did that come from? And I started thinking about, okay, well, where did this start like in my life? And I remember a time whenever I was growing up, we had like standardized tests and, back when we had to like fill out the Scantron sheets, you could only like fill out one specific, you could only check one on the demographic information. So I remember sitting there at my desk, I think I was probably in elementary school maybe. And, there was white and then there was Asian and I didn't know which one to check. And the teacher came over and asked me, because I was just staring at this paper, like clueless.
Right.
Teacher was like, hey, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm Korean and I'm white. I'm not sure what to put because I can only check one. And she was like, well, just put what you're the majority of. I was like, well, I'm half and half,
okay.
So I don't really know how to answer that. And then she's like, well, just put white because it's easier. And so for a long time, I was actually just putting that I was white on everything. And as I got older, I was like, no, like I am absolutely half Korean. Like I am good enough to be half Asian. So that's kind of where that kind of hit me. And so I really wanted to just talk more a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think there's some, so there's two parts that I think that I see being like the major catalysts for when someone feels like they're not Asian enough. And so one of them is going to be immediately if you come from a mixed background. So like I have mixed background kids. My wife's Italian. And so my kids are like, so which box? They have the same question, like which box do I check? And I always say the one that gets you the scholarship. I joke around, but I'm actually serious. So like the idea of, but it's a good, I'm glad that we have these conversations because it's like, at this point in time, I think society will probably start merging around to where, hey, so we can check more than one. And I've seen them, especially like online stuff. We got to take all of whatever servers we have to do. So time has evolved where at least American society has acknowledged that like, no, you can actually be more than one bubble with a number 2 pencil. So that's kind of nice that, time has evolved like that. But that doesn't mean that like we don't have still a one section of us that has this lingering thought of like, am I not Asian enough? I don't really know. And that was some of the things that I saw on Facebook as far as everybody commenting as far as one of the being big catalysts. The other piece that I saw, and I'm gonna pass it over to you, Ron, as well, is the other catalyst that I think is a huge idea where someone says you are not Asian enough. And one of them is it's language. It's being able to speak. If you're going to say that, hey, I come from this background, and if you don't speak the language, you are immediately not Asian enough. And you can see, I have definitely felt that like sort of shame. I'll tell a story after in a little bit, but like that idea of, oh, you're not Filipino enough. Like, wait, what? How? Why? And so as being a, so I guess, Ron, are you considered then first or second generation?
I would say first.
Yeah, I think so too.
I would
I
say
still, I'm
first. Yeah.
terrible by that, but yeah, you're first. So like, what have you seen as far as, and again, you can reference what the conversation we had on the Philan page, but like, where do you see language being one of those huge catalysts as far as where people potentially don't feel Asian enough?
So for me, I'm guilty of it. So I'm gonna give you a perfect example. So the other last week, actually, there's two basic training, basic trainee, straight from basic training. After basic training, they go straight here. They never go to tech school. It's a new thing in the Air Force. And then there's two Filipinos that came in, two I would say students. Two Filipinos. One can speak Tagalog, and the other one couldn't speak Tagalog. But and I'm guilty of it because I don't know why I had like more connection to the one who can speak Tagalog, and I was like, why am I doing this? So I kind of like engaged like to the other trainee or student who couldn't speak Tagalog because I want to bring her in. So and I but like I said, I was leaning towards with her, and I remember this conversation, all the planning with everything with this YouTube thing. And I was like, why am I doing this? I was like, so I decided, like, what's the best thing to talk about is we just talk about Filipino food. And then both of them started like heading towards me, and then and
Immediately,
so
yes,
forth.
immediately.
Immediately, yeah. It's like, where's the bakery here? Where's the lumpias? You know what I mean? So yeah. So for me, I'm trying to change as a person. I was like, right now, my family is they're mixed kids too, and in order for me to teach them the right things, and I should be applying that outside too. So
Yeah.
Hey, sir, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh, see, I muted myself. This is why it's amateur hour over here. So
I thought
that's
it was
okay.
just me.
No, that's that. Thank you. I think you probably texted me, and I like turned my phone over, so that's beside the point. We're live, and I don't care. It's one take, Jake. It's fine. So the idea of trying to be understanding where all of our backgrounds come from, and when we come across another Asian, anything like that is, and you may not even know you're coming across another Asian. The idea when it comes up, it's like, hey, so I didn't realize that there's something familiar here. Let's talk more about those kind of things. I like finding things that I find something familiar with someone and kind of connecting with that, as opposed to when I find something out, trying to find something of like, oh, you're not enough. I feel that's kind of like a weird. Have you experienced that along the way, Faliesha?
In the sense of like, I would say yes and no. So I do try to connect with people who are also Asian, but a lot of people are very confused when they see me too. They're like, "Oh, we think you're mixed." And so people kind of just ask like, "Oh, where'd you grow up?" And I'm like, "Oh, South Carolina." And then they say, "Well, where were you born?" I was like, "Alaska." but I know what they're like leading to. And so most of the time I just come out and say, oh yeah, I'm half Korean, because that's what question I know that they're trying to figure out, trying to think through in their head. But I do try to, I guess, involve myself in the conversation. But then honestly, like I do feel a bit of like imposter syndrome sometimes, because I don't really feel like I belong because I am only half. So
I actually remembered to unmute myself. So, so one of the things I was thinking about was like there is a Ron knows this. So I'm a big fan of Bruce Lee. So huge. I love studying his philosophy. I love understanding just kind of like his impact to the culture, to American culture, and worldwide. So a lot of time when he was growing up, he was kind of like in this weird kind of predicament as well, where like in certain, like when he was in America, he was too Asian. Like he was not American enough or whatever. He was too Asian. And then when he went back home to China, he was like, you're too American now. Like, wait, what? I can't be like not enough in both. Like that's ridiculous. Like how can these kind of things in I don't know if Asians are in a unique place where we're the only ones feel like that, but you hit on something earlier where I Colonel Chaik and I were talking about this last week, where we're one of the few people to where when someone asks you, where are you from? That's like, you get asked that question like at least 3 times. Like, where are you from? Well, South Carolina. Where are you from? Alaska? I was born in England, technically. So shout out, Ron, I know your wife's from England. And so like the idea of, but I'm not English. No, or I'm from Hawaii. That's where I'm from. And it's just kind of odd. And I have a Hispanic looking last name because, again, to Filipinos in the history. And so this is kind of a weird piece of like when we see it and be like, oh, and then you kind of get like this weird kind of like, oh, you're I don't believe you, or you don't get to claim credit. It's a lowercase Korean or whatever it is.
yes, and it's interesting that you bring up the name thing, because when people see my name, they're completely thrown off. So when they meet me in person, they're like, are you Faliesha? I'm like, yes, Faliesha Yaeger. And they're like, what? Because my last name is German. My first name, a lot of people think that I'm actually Black because of the spelling of my first name. And then my middle name is actually the Korean portion of my name, which is, not commonly used. Like you don't go up to somebody and say, hi, I'm Faliesha Yaeger. Like you kind of just say your first and last name and move on. So
sure. Yeah. It's definitely some interesting pieces of where we come from and just kind of the different kind of things where people don't necessarily understand those things are happening, but it definitely is happening. So on Ron, on your side, like have you, as you come up through the Air Force, like, did you experience like, and I can tell you have a Filipino accent because I can tell, but like, has that part sort of like, have you experienced some awkwardness or friction because of like where you saw it, and then you're next to another Filipino where like he or she doesn't sound like Ron? That's kind of odd. Like where it kind of is like, oh, which one of you is more Filipino? Have you ever seen something like that?
From my experience, not really, but it's more like when you meet someone, like if you hear another Filipino guy, even in store, like even though if you're eavesdropping, right, you instantly have that connection already. I don't know, because in the Filipino, like even in the page, there's like probably you'll see a Filipino humor that you can't even understand. Like, what the hell are they talking about, or what's the inside joke? But when it comes to that language between a Filipino guy knows Tagalog and grew up in the Philippines, they automatically have that innate connection. I don't know how to say it, but that's how it goes. Even in a basketball court, it's the same thing. I don't know. It's just kind of weird.
I think language ends up becoming like one of the strongest ways to connect with people, right? And so like, so for instance, I already said I'm from Hawaii, right? So I know none Tagalog, legit, or Ilocano. Like I don't, that was never, as I grew up in Hawaii, that was not just emphasized for my family. But what was emphasized was learning Hawaiian. So I actually know more Hawaiian than I know Tagalog or Ilocano. And so, and my culture when I grew up is Hawaii. Like this is like boom, 808 all day for reals. Like this is where when people asks me, like I'm local. That's what I am, because it's a lifestyle thing, and I take it as a point of pride because when I grew up in Hawaii, it was a blend of everything. I had to relearn exactly like what was Filipino, what was Korean, what was Japanese. I didn't know what it was. I just realized it was all awesome because I had it all surrounding me. And so that idea of language, when I go back home, like there is if you've been in Hawaii and you've been stationed in Hawaii, you can be there. There's this like slang. It's called Pidgin English. Like I can turn it on immediately whenever I'm back home, and I feel exactly home, and I can fit in with whoever. And even like if I meet someone else from Hawaii, I could turn on Pidgin English, and they actually, oh yeah, I didn't realize you're from there. I'm like, yes, it's one of those kind of things. And so I don't think it's a fault per se when you hear like an accent. When you hear, and then it's familiarity of language. My concern is where when you don't hear it or you see certain things and it ends up becoming divisive. This is probably like the theme kind of leading into what I feel are some of the solutions, but like, or the problems and solutions. It's that trying to find places of divisiveness. I never understood like why we need to have amongst ourselves, why we need to kind of measure, be like, oh no, I think I'm more Asian than you, and this is not any other race putting those kind of words other than us. And this is why I wanted to talk about it this week. So there is what we talked about, what I've seen in the Facebook forums and stuff like that is how can we all, do you think it's ever too late to try and embrace your heritage, wherever you come from? Do you think it's like, and I'll pass it over to you, Faliesha. Do you think it's like where you can try and is in even an attempt at trying to embrace your culture and your heritage? Is that a good or bad, or can that be a positive thing?
So I would say that I can relate a lot to this right now in my life because I'm 28 years old and I'm actually PCSing to Korea this summer. I've never felt very connected to being Korean at all. As I mentioned earlier, my mom wasn't really in my life growing up at all either. So I was exposed to Korean food. So I'm like super excited about being able to go to Korea and have like authentic Korean food. But just the concept of me thinking through, okay, how is this PCS going to be for me? So I get to spend a year in a country that I shouldn't feel, ostracized in, right? Like I should feel comfortable there. But at the same time, it's kind of like that imposter syndrome I mentioned earlier too. I really feel like it'll be a little weird at first. And so I'll just need to like work through that for myself. And I have a couple friends who are PCSing this summer as well out there. So I'm thankful that I'll kind of have a friend group already. But I don't think it's too late. And in fact, I'm really excited for the opportunity to be able to kind of dig into that heritage and immerse myself in it.
It's awesome. That's so good. Yeah. And I think that idea where you're not, it can be scary at times to where like, am I going to embarrass myself? Because you can feel like you're already starting behind, or you could just kind of rely on that excitement. Being like, no, I'm gonna take this opportunity because that's what it is. It's an opportunity for me to try and learn something more about my heritage, more about my culture, and then it just enhances your experience as a leader, as an officer. Those are the things that I think end up becoming part of that. Ron, going back to your earlier example, did you feel like, so between the two first-term airmen, how would you approach like where I'll say the female one, the one that didn't speak Tagalog, like would you feel comfortable trying to introduce some of that stuff to her and be like, hey, so do you want to learn Tagalog? Do you want to learn more about those kind of things? How would you approach that where you notice something, but you as a leader, how would you kind of make sure you're being more inclusive to the situation versus divisive?
So, for me as a leader now, I normally, what's good with the Air Force is that they give us a lot of programs. There's a lot of tools, and including me, even though I know the Tagalog language, if I take they call it LEAP program, which is Language Enabled Airman Program. I think I submitted a couple applications with you because you need commander's signature for it. But that's kind of like an opportunity or a gateway for them to learn the language. And the airmen who can't speak Tagalog can use me as every day. We could talk about just in Tagalog, or just to polish what she can learn so she can get back into the culture. And I'm really open to that. And not only that, she has another colleague who can speak Tagalog, which her peer. So they both live in the dorm, so they can actually have a conversation. So
Right, right. So that's what I'm saying. So like you're taking the approach of being open to the idea. You're trying to foster like, no, this is an opportunity. You don't see it as a thing of, well, they're a lost cause because whatever. She's like 19, I'm sure, just coming out first term airman. She don't know anything. And so that's the beauty of, when you first come into the Air Force, sometimes you're so fresh about stuff, you're very moldable, right? And so the beauty of, I bet you she didn't realize when she was moving to Alaska, she was going to connected with people from her background, like, oh crap, I can learn from this kind of thing. And so that's great. It doesn't surprise me by any means as far as your leadership and trying to advance, not only for the Filipino culture and the AAPI culture, but just for the Air Force itself. I think that's just a shining example of how, when we recognize the leaders who find I don't care what the thread is that's common. Once you find that thread, just use it to your advantage, because it's going to be a thing that it gets them more. You're building those bridges of trust. You're building those kind of those team formations that just make us a little bit more accepting and be like, hey, so if you're willing to, and you're okay, you're not judging me for not being Asian enough because I don't speak the language, then maybe I'll be able to say, hey, so I'm not good at this portion of my job. You're open to being more vulnerable, which it can only make you in the end more stronger, because you can actually accept that vulnerability. So I think there is the mixed race and being from a mixed race, as well as not speaking the language. I find that being the two most divisive things where we consider each other just not being Asian enough, which is, we need to get over those kind of things, to be honest. Yeah. So then, so looking forward, and this is where like my mentors are telling me, like, don't be talking about stuff and just talking about crap and just saying how the world is terrible. Faliesha, what would you say is like some of the things you would say that we want to, as fellow AAPI, so we can reduce this feeling of not being Asian enough from each other?
I guess the one thing that I would say is just be mindful of when your interactions with people who you may not know their background. You don't know whether or not they know the language. You don't know, if they were born in country or, in Alaska. And just be mindful about the comments that are like, oh, well, for a half breed, you're cool, or things like that, where people kind of like that video that you sent out last night, like, people think that, it's kind of rooted in humor, but it can also be pretty hurtful and kind of make people think a little bit more about like, well, am I good enough to be Korean? Which when I say that out loud, it's like, that sounds crazy, right? But things like that. And I'll tell a quick story here. So whenever I was in a group of friends, and I had made some kimchi soup, and I had used the recipe that my mom had taught me. And one of my full Korean friends comes over and he's like, hey, kimchi soup was really good. And I was like, oh, thanks. Like, I'm really glad that you liked it. And he's like, yeah, I was really surprised because, you're half Korean and all. Like, I wasn't expecting you to be able to cook kimchi soup. And
that is like, terrible. I would punch that dude in the throat. Be like, F you, dude.
I was like, okay, well, I'm glad that you really enjoyed it, but that was like, I think there's a compliment somewhere in there, but not
sort of.
really.
Sort of. That's what I'm saying. Like those random comments where people are like, "Oh, I'm surprised," because you're half, so I only expect you to be half good. Like, that's not a compliment. Stop saying stupid shit like that. Like, that's not a compliment. Stop saying that. So.
Exactly. So just being mindful overall of like the words that you're saying, which, I mean, I guess we should all be that way, but just really in this context, and just be mindful that, everybody's kind of on their, their own path and stuff. And, they might be struggling with trying to figure out if they're, good enough to be Asian, or, I don't even know very much Korean. I actually know more Chinese than I do Korean, because they offer Chinese in high school and college, which my mom was not happy about, but I couldn't help it because they didn't offer Korean. So
right. Yeah, it's a I think that idea of just finding the opportunities and take advantage of them, it's going to be, it's weird. Those small, I call them almost like the death by like 1,000 paper cuts. Like you hear like these weird kind of things that sort of make you sort of not feel as good as far like I'm not Asian enough. And they're not blatant kind of things, especially from amongst ourselves. That's the weird thing. I think it's not outright, like racism. They're like it's just kind of weird, like hidden kind of things but over time will add up. And clearly there's enough of us who have experienced this or have seen it that we're trying to overcome these things and making sure that it's not it's not a thing about not being, we are Asian enough. That's a silly phrase to say out loud. Ron, as a first generation Filipino. So hold on. Remember that conversation about like Filipino American and American Filipino, or what that one Facebook thing? What was that again? Like it was what was like the summary of that?
It was a rabbit hole, so it was really tough to understand. But I think what I was trying to say is that we shouldn't. Same question that you have for Captain is that you just basically try not to be an asshole, right? Just have an open mind, even though another person doesn't know how to speak the language. Just try to bring them in, reel them in, and give them the tools. Maybe invite them a couple of potlucks. Maybe they'll learn a thing or two, and just make people better. That's all I've been thinking about lately. And just to let you know, my wife we're expecting, and we're not even sure if they're asking me, are you going to teach your baby a Tagalog or English? But for me, as a first generation, I struggled when I first came here. And now I'm not even sure if I should teach my baby Tagalog or English. Because I know if we focus on English, he or she will have more opportunities, down the road versus me. I mean, yeah, I got some goals and stuff, but if I had that tool, if I grew up here and spoke English, I think I went a different route, if that makes sense. So I don't know. It's still, I don't know.
No, so my kids, right? So, most high schools, teenagers, they got to figure out some other second language. So my daughter she first was starting American Sign Language. So she learned how to do that, which is pretty cool. And she understands like a little bit. And then she took French. I was like, okay. You have to take one, so I don't care. But my son, it was like he's looking at his menu and then he's like, maybe I'll take, I don't know. I was like, don't pick French. He goes, why not? I was like, you don't need to take French. It's not necessarily, it can be a thing. And he's like, how about Spanish? I'm like, yes, you should pick Spanish, because when you talk about the feasibility of certain languages in 2021, like in America. And it's not a good or bad. It's just reality. Spanish is going to be is going to be more prevalent than Tagalog or Korean, maybe, depending on what circles you're going to be in. So I'm going to have my kids like, no, you should learn Spanish. I took Spanish in high school. Your mom took Spanish in high school. So we can figure out those things. And I don't see that being like a negative thing. It'd be like, oh, so you're not learning Tagalog, you're not learning Italian or Hawaiian. Like, no, you're learning something. Inevitably, what I feel like is the more opportunities we can feel, regardless of whatever spot in time we happen to be in life when you join the Air Force, right? If you're a first generation coming over from the Philippines, you're from a military family or whatever it is, like you have these genes, these kind of foundational things in you. And sometimes, depending on where you're from, you may not actually experience the full benefit of doing that. But just because you didn't have it from the beginning doesn't mean you should be prevented from taking advantage of those opportunities. Because I firmly believe the diversity we have amongst the AAPI community and within the Air Force as a whole, all of those things are amazing. So to prevent someone from trying to reach back at any point in time to try and stay connected with their cultural heritage is terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. and I'm imploring to, I don't have to you two, you already know, but like to the rest of the AAPI community, we got to stop doing that. To Ron's point, he knows what it is. Hashtag DBA. Don't be an asshole. Like, we can't have ourselves creating barriers that prevent people of like even just trying to be vulnerable to be like, hey, so I'm Korean or I'm Japanese or Chinese, but I am technically or genetically, but depending where I'm at or how I was raised, I just never was connected with that. So don't hold that against me. That's a weird thing to do, right? And so that idea, and so if you're willing to find people who want to expose you and have you educate and learn about the culture, like Ron, like, or for Faliesha, when you move back, when you have your assignment in Korea, take advantage of those things. Find the right people who are willing to kind of show you those things, show you the ropes, or just kind of expand those experiences. That just is going to make you a better leader and a better person. I really think that the more you experience how you didn't even know that was actually part of you, actually makes the best part of you, the best version of you, I should say.
Hey, sir, can I throw a curveball there? So there's when you're talking about not too Asian enough, right? Another curveball we have is that when marrying a non-Filipino or non-Asian partner, and either your parents or even your friends will call you out. So, because in the past I had a friend of mine a long time ago, and he messaged me, so Ron, so you don't like our own people now? I was like, what are you talking about?
Oh, Jesus.
So that's a curveball, right? I was like, what are you talking about? Oh, yeah, because you married a foreigner. I was like, are you serious right now? And automatically block on Facebook. I don't want to talk to this guy. And I'm just fortunate enough that that my parents are very open-minded as well, because I know some parents they're hardcore Asians. They're not gonna
For real. Oh yeah.
So that's another curveball. I just want to put it out.
No,
there,
that's a really good. Faliesha, have you experienced anything like that on your side?
So I'm not married, but my mother was very much like, don't date people who aren't Asian. And it was always very interesting because, I was young at the time when she was telling me these things, and I was like, why? Like, what's so wrong with it? Like, I just don't understand. So yeah, I have experienced it, mainly from my mom, I would say, but not really from friends or anything like that. But I wonder though if it has something to do with me being half Korean, like just only half, if that plays into it.
Oh, so I had, it's funny, my brother Travis was he used to always get on me in high school. He's like, he would know who I'm dating. He'd be like, and then he'd be like, hey, when are you going to come back home? And I'm like, what? He goes, you're not dating any Asian girls. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I just never did. I actually can think, like, I think I dated like one way back home in Hawaii. And then it just never became a thing for me. And so, when so if he's tuning in tonight, he's gonna give me crap, which is fine. But the idea of like, where you start getting kind of weird looks as far as like, oh, you're too good for your own kind. Like, no, that's not. Where is that coming from? I had one other weird kind of story. It's not like a bad story, but it was kind of awkward. I was going to my wife's cousin wedding, and so he's Italian, and then he was marrying a Filipino girl. And so we go to the wedding, and so me and Gina, so like you got to sit on like the bride and groom side, right? And so I'm sitting on the groom side with all the Italian people. The entire Filipino delegation on the other side, they're like, who is this dude? Is he related to us? I'm like, no, I'm on this side of the family. It just kind of, and I'm not kidding. The entire time people are like, is he an uncle? Is he my cousin? I don't really know who this is. I'm like, I'm not even fucking, what? No, I'm on over here. I'm just happen to be Filipino. Yes, we're meeting on the same like event, but it was just kind of odd that I got those kind of weird looks. And, because I think they weren't expecting any other, like, oh, that would never ever happen. Another Filipino would not marry like outside the race kind of thing. And so, no, that's a good, when potentially that's again, when I talk about like that internal kind of friction where it's our own people that are building, and it's not even, to be honest, it's not a real thing. It's not a real thing at this point in 2021. Like, who you're going to be with and all that kind of stuff, it is what it is. But It doesn't mean that doesn't exist. It doesn't mean there's going to be some familial or just kind of weird judgment where like, oh, so you're our own kind is not good enough for you to want to be in a relationship with, which is a different, I didn't even think about that. That could be an entire episode on itself, but that's a different way of thinking about you're just not Asian enough because you can't, you don't find beauty or whatever attractiveness in our own spaces. That's good. That's good curveball, Ron. Thanks, dude.
You're welcome, sir.
All right. So, like I said, I do want to try and think about some positive things. So here's what are some of my thoughts. I'll throw these out here and I'll offer you guys for final comments. What can we do as fellow AAPIs to reduce this feeling of not being Asian enough? So here's some things, some takeaways. One, hashtag DBA. Just don't be an asshole. It's the easiest thing in the world. Stop trying to find ways to box people into being a real Asian. Because first of all, that's not even a real fucking thing. Like, there's no real Asians. We're just Asians. We just are. Because that term is very, very divisive. And I really think that like we were trying to find places that really want to unite us instead of divide us. Number two, be yourself. Wherever you don't... However you came into this world and your experiences should not be held against you. And I think that's the beauty of being in the Air Force. It's like we're trying to, at least in my eyes, and this is how I believe it, we're based on merit. I appreciate everybody's backgrounds and where they're coming from, but like I just want you to be yourself and be a good leader. That's what I'm going to be most interested in. So as long as you can be yourself, and if the Asian side of you happens to be a large or small portion of that, that's fair. I like all of it, and if you're going to keep on growing, like we said, it's never too late to try and understand and connect with your heritage, and you should not be ashamed of that. And find people like opportunities going overseas and getting stationed there, or finding awesome leaders like Sergeant Esposo, be like who's willing to make those bridges, make those connections. Those are the people that I strive to be like. I strive to be like you, Faliesha, and strive to be like you, Ron. Be like, no. I want to be a good example of what a AAPI can be like there. Finding strength out of similarities. I talk about that as far as like, hey, so in the Air Force, we're all coming from different backgrounds. We are always searching for something to be connected to. And so if we can find those little things, even if it's not the strongest thing, find those things that just kind of end up being like, no, I'll help foster this. Maybe because my growing up in Hawaii is different from somebody else growing up in Hawaii, but it doesn't matter. You said Hawaii, so automatically I'm going to invite you over for food because this is what's going to happen. And then I think we talked a little bit about this as far as passing down your culture. Passing down our Asian cultures, whatever amount that happens to be. And even if it's burgeoning and you just kind of learn about it, the beauty of it is it's awesome that those kind of things. I really think that's I don't want to say separates us, but it's unique to us. It's unique that the AAPI experience is, I've always felt like is one of the most welcoming and awesome kind of feelings that I've felt. Like when I look at another person and I find other APIs, like there's home. I find home in every single person API that I see out there. And it's not are you home enough? Like that's a stupid ass freaking statement. Like you're home because we're here together. So let's get the job done and have a good time as we go forward. So Faliesha, I'll offer you some final comments.
Yeah, so just to echo you, just being yourself and just being accepting of others. And like I said earlier, everybody, you never know, where somebody was born or where they grew up or, where their family's from, because those could all be different things. So just being able to accept the people around you and just be welcoming.
Thank you much. See, I had to hit the unmute button again. Ron, pass it over to you for final comments, brother.
So just to add on from your comments and Captain, I just want to say that we shouldn't wait till May to discuss all these things. I think we should continue on all year long, and make people better around us and help them, kind of like bring them in, reel them in, and give them the tools to help them out, give them the new recipe for any type of food. Food always bring everyone together. So I really believe on that. And just be a good person and hashtag DBAA.
That's right. There is not even though it's the name of the title of this episode, there's no such thing as not being Asian enough. We're all Asian American Pacific Islanders. I don't care. Like there is that idea of trying to find places to divide us is a huge thing that we can overcome ourselves. This is, and I'm seriously talking to our own community. We can be better. We can actually elevate ourselves to all of the beauty and amazingness that are there, if only we just get out of our own way. That's it. Like there's that weird piece of like trying to judge other people and be like, I'm more Asian than you. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. That's not even like a thing. There is the beauty of where we're going to become as a community, and what we bring to the Air Force is going to be when we're more inclusive versus being divisive. So Faliesha, Ron, I do appreciate you guys taking your time out tonight to talk to me about this. Ron, I'm going to take your lead and try and figure out ways that I can keep on talking about this throughout the whole. We started all this stuff in April because I felt it was important enough to talk about now. I don't have to wait until the magical month of May, as soon as it's our month and we get to talk about stuff. So I hope this conversation inspires you, the listener, to try and get out there and just find your own places, right? Find your own places to where you can maybe self-analyze and realize that you're not, you need to be part of the solution versus part of the problem. And there is not a such thing as being Asian enough. We're just a strong community out there. That is the beauty of what we bring to this world. So I'm very, very thankful for your guys' time, for the YouTube and the internet audience for joining us tonight. And then we'll catch everybody next week, Tuesday already, for another episode of Asian American Pacific Islander Leaders Unmuted. Faliesha, Ron, thank you for joining me tonight. And we'll talk to everybody next week. Peace.